There will be another day. There will be another day. There will be another.
So it's the 28th of April 2020, and this is the Irish Unity broadcast, and as always you're all very welcome back. Now, on Easter Sunday last, a support organisation was launched across the pond in the United States of America, and that group is called Americans for a United Ireland. Now, America obviously has a long history of proud support for the Irish liberation struggle, going way back to the Fenian days, and probably before that, no doubt before that in some form or another. I'd like to go into that tonight, and I'm going to go into that tonight, the legacy of American support for a United Ireland, support for national liberation, and in the modern term, Irish unity. With me from Chicago is my good friend Colm Misteal. Colm comes from an Irish Republican family over there in Chicago. Obviously he's of Irish descent, and he's really the main player behind this new initiative, Americans for United Ireland. How's it going, Colm? How you doing out there? Great. Colm, just to explain, if you give us a bit of an introduction about yourself, and then if you can tell us what's going on with your new initiative.
So I grew up, as you said, in a Republican family. My parents were both involved in Irish Northern Aid. I myself first got involved when I was about 14 years old. I did a 24-hour fast with Fenian for the prisoners. Kind of been involved ever since. I helped found the Chicago Hunger Strike Commemoration Committee for the 25th anniversary back in 2010. I've been involved in URSNA over the years as well. I'm a former member of that. I've been involved in Irish Freedom Committees doing support for political prisoners and their families.
Just URSCN is the Irish Republican Socialist Committees of North America, yeah?
Correct, yeah.
Just because some of the listeners wouldn't be aware of that. So Americans for a United Ireland, what's that about? I mean, you launched it on Easter Sunday. Give us a bit of a background about the initiative, please, Colm.
So it was originally founded back in 2008. There was an event in Kansas City, Missouri about Bloody Sunday. Americans for United Ireland was kind of, since then, it was kind of sitting somewhat dormant. With mostly an online presence, just promoting Irish republicanism, promoting, information about the situation going on there, news and statements from different groups. But we didn't really have concrete vision of what the organization would be until about this past year, kind of in response to the Yes for Unity campaign, kind of taking inspiration from that. We kind of sat down and talked about what can we do today in 2019-2020 to bring this forward, to bring American support forward in Ireland. And with that, we decided upon a singular focus. We're only concentrating on Irish unity, and doing that, but supporting the campaign for the Irish unity referendum that Yes for Unity has been campaigning for the last couple of years. So with that new focus and taking inspiration from the energy that we've seen with Yes for Unity, kind of moving forward and trying to make this a support organization for the 21st century, building on the rich heritage of Irish American support for Irish freedom, but bringing that forward. So it involves some people that have been involved with the IRSP, Northern Aid, Irish Freedom Committee, but also people that have not been involved in any of those groups before. So just as long as you support Irish unity, you can be a part of Americans for United Ireland. I think part of the problem with support groups in the past decades particularly is they get too involved with the political sectarianism of republicanism, where I belong to this group, so that way I want nothing to do with this other group, sort of thing. And that's spilled over into the U.S. There's been a number of splits in organizations where either you support RSF or the 32s, or you can't be with us, or things like that. We want nothing to do with that divisiveness. We want to bring everyone together and say, hey, we're Irish Americans, we support the campaign for United Ireland, and we're going to do what we can to put pressure on the government here in the U.S. and as well as Dublin and London, and also just to raise awareness amongst the Irish American community, which is a huge community and has historically been a major part of the support for Irish freedom.
Colm, I want to do two things. I want to get into the sort of ideology of orthodoxy. You mentioned there, rightly so, that America had a myriad of support groups, but most of them have been, very much solidly aligned to one of the ideological based Republican organisations in Ireland. But I want to get into that. But before I go into that, I know that you can give us a bit of an insight into the evolution of Irish American support for the independence movement back here in the homeland. Can you give us a bit of your historical insight, just for the benefit of the listeners, just about the development, the evolution, the historical evolution of Irish American support for the liberation struggle here?
So the earliest earliest that I have information for would be in the 1820s. There was most likely support for the United Irishmen and Robert Emmet and that, but for what I know about for sure, it goes back to the 1820s with first the Hibernian Relief Society in Boston, and then a few years later the Friends of Ireland, which was founded in 1825. These organizations were supporting the campaign for Catholic emancipation. People probably heard about the penal laws. That's basically when the Catholic faith was outlawed by the British rule in Ireland. Americans rallied together to try to support this campaign for Catholic emancipation. So that was one of the very first instances of Irish America raising funds, raising support for efforts in Ireland, which takes us to the Fenian Brotherhood, which, very rich Fenian history that we have here in America, which is so deep. I think it's a well that's barely untapped, in the historical record and the literature that's out there. But the Fenian Brotherhood was founded in 1858 by John O'Mahony. It was a sister organization to the Irish Republican Brotherhood, so it was the American version of the IRB. So they worked together. 1858 was just before the American Civil War, and a lot of the people that were founders of that, including John O'Mahony himself, were involved in the Young Islander, veterans from the Young Islander Rebellion. They immigrated to the U.S., including John O'Mahony, and these guys eventually organized and they formed the Fenian Brotherhood. Their first convention was held in the middle of the American Civil War in 1863 in Chicago.
Yeah.
After the Civil War, a lot of the veterans who fought in the Irish brigades and different aspects of the Union Army, and even some that were fought in the Confederate Army, got involved with the Fenians, and they had the idea to raid, basically hold Canada hostage.
Yeah.
So they sold a lot of bonds. You might see a lot of things, bond of the Irish Republic and that. So they sold thousands and thousands of dollars worth of bonds, and they used a lot of these funds to buy arms. Mm-hmm. And in 1866, they raided Canada. John O'Mahony himself led 700 men to New Brunswick. Yeah. And again, they wanted to hold Canada hostage for Irish freedom. Needless to say, this campaign was a disaster. Yeah. They weren't able to succeed in taking over Canada, and this did a lot of damage in many ways to American relations with Great Britain, and also it brought down a lot of heat upon the Fenian Brotherhood. Let
me get this right, Colm, because a lot of our especially younger listeners, this is going to be probably unheard of. You're saying that a battalion of Irishmen in the United States physically invaded Canada.
Yeah, they might have upwards of 25,000 troops, and they armed themselves. These are all veterans of the American Civil War, which just ended a year before.
Yeah, seasoned fighters.
They organized and, like I said, they invaded Canada in 1866.
Wow. But it didn't work out. What happened?
Well, so it was pretty much a disaster. It brought a lot of heat down. A lot of men were arrested. And as a result of that, the Fenian Brotherhood kind of split into different factions. Yeah. Because of this, the fallout of this, the IRB kind of cut ties with the Fenian Brotherhood, which led to the creation of Clan na Gael. So the Fenian Brotherhood this is in 1867 we're up to now. So 1867 Clan na Gael was founded, and that became the new organization that the IRB was connected to. Yeah. The Fenian Brotherhood still existed for another decade or so, but as time went on, they became more obscure and less influenced. So basically, the IRB, in the result of this, they didn't want to support either factions of the Fenian Brotherhood in response to the failure of the raids in Canada, and Clan na Gael was founded.
I mean, that's still an awesome piece of history. Like, Irishmen going into Canada, and it's the ultimate karma for imperialism.
Interesting, the first time the initials IRA were used was during this invasion of Canada. On one of the flags of these regiments invading Canada that had IRA on a green flag.
I actually remember an incident in school. I went to school in Uri, and there was a quite well-known GA player called, I'll not name him, but he was teaching us history, and we were reading up on that period. And I remember seeing in the school textbook a photo of that incursion or that invasion by the Fenians, and I saw that. And it must be a well-known painting now that it showed the flag with IRA on it, the initials. And I remember saying that, and this was in the 1980s, like in the middle of the IRA campaign, when IRA people didn't want to hear the initials mentioned anywhere. And I said that flag says IRA on it, and the guy goes, "No, you're mad." And the teacher swore blue in the face that it said IRB, even though it definitely said IRA. So I'm glad that I'm glad to hear that confirmed, from a reputable source. So we're up to Clan na Gael,
Yeah, so Clan na Gael, founded in 1867. It was originally called the Nappertandy Club in New York. John Devoy became one of the major players in Clan na Gael and the IRB. He immigrated to the U.S. in 1871, and as soon as he got there, he immediately set out to try to free the Fenian prisoners that were in Australia at Fremantle Prison.
Yeah.
Took some political maneuvering within Clan na Gael to get support for his idea, but eventually he was able to get the support, and they raised money and they bought a ship called the Catalpa.
Yeah.
No, so here's what happened. These guys get on a ship in Massachusetts in April 1875, and their plan is to sail all the way to Australia, in Western Australia, to Fremantle, to get these 6 Fenian prisoners and then sail back.
Wow.
It's a miracle that this pulled off. It would make a great movie if they were to make one day.
Yeah.
But it was a great success. They were able to contact Fenian agents they had in Australia to get word into the men in the prison. And not only did they have to break out of prison, they then had to get to the ship, and the ship had to escape. So it was like 2 escapes in one, pretty much.
Yeah.
But they were able to pull it off, and they returned to New York by August of that year, August 1876. They arrived to New York to a hero's welcome. As they're sailing away from Australia, they get to international waters. They raised the American flag, which meant that the British had to stop, otherwise they would be firing upon an American ship, which would be an international incident. So they were able to escape, come back to the United States, and because of this success of this mission, this launched John Devoy to becoming a leader of Clan na Gael. So over the next decades, Clan na Gael worked very closely with the IRB.
Yeah.
There were a couple, as you can imagine, in any Irish organization, there's a couple of splits as we get to the late 19th century, but by 1900, John Devoy was able to consolidate Clan na Gael into one united organization.
Yeah.
And this became the main fundraiser for the 1916 rebellion, and also the Tan War, which would follow that.
Brilliant. Wow. And Clan na Gael were still going well into the 1970s. I think Clan na Gael.
Clan na Gael still exists to this day, in some form or another.
Yeah.
They themselves, there were a number of splits throughout the 20th century that kind of mirrored splits back in Ireland. So there was a split over the treaty, but the majority of Clan na Gael was intact. And then the same when we get to 1969, there was an element of Clan na Gael that supported the officials, but the majority supported the provisionals. Yeah. There was rumors of other splits, maybe around 1986 or 1997, 98 or so. See, Clan na Gael was never a very public organization, so a lot of it was kind of more underground, so it's kind of similar to the IRB. So it's hard to know exactly what that. There isn't. They don't have like a website where you can go to and figure out here's everything about Clan na Gael. So they were like a semi-public organization.
Because the reason I was bringing up in the 1970s, or it might have been the 60s, was I remember the book Deal Shocked on Commandant General Tom Maguire, which was authored by Rory O'Brady, God rest him, and there was a photo of the general going into New York, I think, and Clan na Gael were there.
It's actually Chicago.
It's Chicago, yeah. They're like armed to the teeth, and
the Clan na Gael guards meeting them at the airport.
Yeah, amazing. It's some history, like. But we're getting up into, and yep, you mentioned splits, officials, the 1960s. So we're getting up into the modern era, and I'm hoping to have Martin Galvin on sometime in the future, all being well. But we are getting into a period that was a little bit hectic and a little bit schismed. Can you give us, if you want to, can you give us a background on the various organisations that were supporting Ireland, perhaps during the most recent conflict, 69 to late 90s and beyond?
So in just before 1916 Rising, Friends of Irish Freedom was founded. Yeah. And again, their goal was for free Ireland, free from British rule. Yeah. They were a massive organization who had support across the United States. They had upwards of 100,000 members and over 500 branches throughout the United States. Their leadership was dominated by members of Clan na Gael, so kind of similar to in Ireland, where members of the IRB were involved in Irish volunteers and other organizations. It was the same here in the United States, where Clan na Gael was part of the members of Clan na Gael were part of the executive of Friends of Irish Freedom. Yeah. And they raised millions of dollars for Dáil Éireann, the first Dáil. And in 1919, there was a visit of Eamon de Valera, which kind of, it started off on the wrong foot. So Dev, who was some might say a very difficult man to deal with, he immediately upon his arrival, he snubbed John Devoy and Daniel Cohallen, who were the leaders of the Clan na Gael and Friends of Irish Freedom. He just ignored them when he first arrived in New York. This is John Devoy, who broke the Young Irelanders out of prison in Australia and brought them to America. De Valera snubbed him. Exactly, yeah. These Fenians who have been for decades had been pushing for Irish freedom. And then here, the president of the Irish Republic, Eamon de Valera, comes and he snubs them and he doesn't meet with them and he goes right to Philadelphia instead of meeting with the men who have not only been funding the war in Ireland, but have kept the Fenian flame alive.
Is there any logical reason for this, or was he tired, or what?
Again, I think it's down to personalities where he didn't like their approach to things, and I think he felt they'd upstage him, kind of a thing. There's a great documentary about De Valera's visit to America and T.G. Caher made last year or so. It's been 2 or 3 episodes. It goes into great detail of showing us. And on this tour, so Dev had a tour of the United States in 1919. Thousands of people came to greet him. Here it is, the president of the Irish Republic. You'd see trains, him being met at the train station with tons of people with Irish flags, the tricolor. Happy to meet Eamon de Valera. So this should have been a great trip. Yeah. But unfortunately, this trip ended up pretty much destroying Irish freedom because of these disputes that de Valera and his people had with Clan na Gael and Friends of Irish Freedom. Eamon de Valera ended up founding his own organization in America called the American Association for the Recognition of the Irish Republic, a name that really rolls off the tongue. And what happened was the Friends of Irish Freedom, like I said, they had 100,000 members. Within a year of de Valera's founding of this new organization, that was cut to 21,000. Wow. So again, over personalities, this led to a split in the main support organization, the U.S. Friends of Irish Freedom, which never recovered. After the treaty, most of the Friends of Irish Freedom, they supported the treaty, and the organization itself was wrapped up by 1932. The interesting thing is, even throughout this time, there was a conflict between de Valera and them over the funds that were raised. Yeah. So de Valera was saying those funds were for the Irish Republic, and eventually, what had to happen, this actually went to court in the United States. The funds had to be returned to the original donors because they couldn't agree of who should they go to the Free State government, should they go to de Valera and Sinn Féin. Of course, this is before he founded Fianna Fáil, and ended up just being returned. So we had this massive support organization in the United States that unfortunately was pretty much destroyed because of internal fighting. Well,
militant, interesting too, because it seems to have a massive support for militant republicanism that he destroyed. Yeah. So we're into the treaty. What happened in 1922? Like what in America? Like when the treaty was coming, 22, 23, and obviously there was civil war here, and the rest is history. What was the response in Irish America during that period?
I think that pretty much the massive support and organizations pretty much just dropped. I'm not too familiar in the very particulars of it, but I imagine it would been great demoralization of Irish American support to see people you had just been supporting and raising this money for and going out and doing all this work for, and now they're fighting each other. Yeah. You can see, Clan na Gael, made it through this time. I think some of them split off, but the main people involved in that, like John DuBois and Joe McGarity and all them, they stuck through it. Friends of Irish Freedom, like I said, by the early 30s, they pretty much wound up. Yeah. But so kind of our American support was kind of probably at a lower ebb, through the 20s and the 30s. Clan na Gael kind of was probably keeping things going. You can see some of the old like Wolf Tone Annuals and Wolf Tone Weekly, some of these newspapers that existed at the time that would be a mention of Clan na Gael here or there. Yeah. But the American support was really at a low ebb until the 1960s.
And then the 60s, the 60s kicked off, and the 60s did what the 60s did. 69, 70, 71, and another division in the Republican movement. But America was always there, like in the background. Yeah. It was always there.
Even in the rights movement, there was a founding of the National Association for Irish Justice in New York in the late 60s.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to look at this organization. It didn't last very long. It's hard to find much information about it. But they organized a tour by Bernard Devlin throughout the United States. They had a student organization. And even at their founding convention, it was addressed by Cathal Goulding.
Yeah.
So you can see there was here's supposed to be a civil rights organization founded in the U.S. to support Ireland. And the chief of staff of the IRA was one of the guests. Yeah. At their founding conference. The national board, if you look at the list of the people who were on it, included a number of Catholic priests, most people who were later involved in the officials in the United States. So when that split happened, there was the number of people from Clan na Gael split, that would have supported the officials. My guess would have been a small number, but there was the founding in the U.S. of the Irish Republican Clubs of North America. Yeah. So that was like the official support movement, their wing in the U.S. But more importantly, and much more significantly was the founding of Irish Northern Aid in 1970 by Michael Flannery, who was a veteran of the 1920s campaign.
But Chicago. I mean, I heard of Chicago was the Irish Freedom Committees. Yeah. Is that later on? Is it?
Oh, yeah, that would be kind of after the '86 split.
Yeah.
Where that really came into prominence.
So throughout the period that it's roughly become, and we hate using the term, but it's out there, roughly known as the Troubles, Irish Northern Aid or NORAID were the main players in Irish American aid for Ireland. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were, like I said, they were founded in 1970, right after that split in the Republican movement, and they were definitely tied to the provisional movement. So at their founding meeting, Sean Keenan from Derry, he was there to represent the Republican movement.
Yeah.
And it was founded as an organization to support prisoners and their families. So that was the main emphasis of Irish Northern Aid. It was a fundraising organization to support Green Cross, to support Incoming Carrock in Dublin. So it was a fundraising organization. They did involve in activism, in the wake of Bloody Sunday, and, protests, and especially in the 1980s, the anti-H Block campaign. So, like, for example, in Chicago, there was a picket in front of the British consulate here in Chicago every day during the hunger strike in 1981. My father actually, he organized and he ran that picket for Irish Northern Aid. So there was massive support throughout the whole United States. If you look at and they had their own weekly newspaper as well, the Irish People.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was reprinting things around public, but it was a huge organization that had a tremendous amount of support. Again, mainly around the issue of supporting the prisoners and their families. Of course, there were allegations that they were directly funding the IRA and buying arms and that.
I don't think they were too embarrassed about those allegations either. Like. No.
But an interesting point was that in the early 1982, George Harris and Michael Flannery and 3 others were arrested for IRA gun running, and they beat the case. It was a really unique thing where they admitted in court that they bought these guns and massive amounts of ammunition for the struggle, and they actually won their case. And one of the things that they made clear in that is the money that was raised for Irish Northern Aid went to the prisoners' families. There was a separate fund pretty much for their other activities, so they kind of kept them separate, which kind of protected the organization. Yeah. So again, the Northern Aid support across the United States, but it was mainly a fundraising organization to support particularly the provisional prisoners, and that's where things kind of got a little, conflict. So, of course, there was more organizations than just the provisional IRA. In the late 70s, the emergence of the INLA and IRSP in 1975. So those in America who wanted to support that organization and support those prisoners, they weren't allowed to do that through Northern Aid. Northern Aid was strictly a provisional support organization. So that led in 1984 to the founding of Irish Republican Socialist Committees North America, which was always a very small organization. It was kind of set up on paper that it would be kind of like an IRSP version of Northern Aid, but it never reached those numbers. It never had. It did do a lot of support for the Republican Socialist movement, but it never came anywhere close to the influence or the numbers that the Northern Aid had.
Yeah, I want to get into ideology because here, thanks for the historical insight. It's been great, but I want to get into ideology and orthodoxy in America, and this is important because especially if we look at Yes for Unity, Yes for Unity and what Yes for Unity are doing is arguably not along the orthodox Republican line, and we're happy to take the criticisms and take the questions, and we're confident that we can answer them. Could I get into, and I suppose you've touched on it, orthodoxy within Irish republicanism in America, and you mentioned about the the adherence of NORAID to the provisional line, obviously the Dáil Éireann, the accepting the legitimate succession line, and that there was that the main thrust of Irish American republicanism, an adherence to, if you want to call it, the succession type of Irish republicanism, Roy O'Brady's line, later on the provisional line. Would it be fair to say that was the main thrust of Irish American ideology at the time?
See, I don't think it would have gone that far. People saw that there was a war going on. The main means of support that was Irish Northern Aid.
Yeah.
Most of these people that were supporting it, they were very working class people, bricklayers, carpenters, plumbers, like salt of the earth people. They didn't really get involved in political ideology.
Yeah.
But so when there were splits that happened, let's say like in 1986 when Sinn Féin accepted their ban on abstentionism.
Yeah.
In Leinster House, Republican Sinn Féin split off. There was a split that happened here in the U.S. that mirrored that. The Irish Freedom Committee, Colm Misteal, that was founded in 1987 in response to that. But even in those early years, it was very small. And again, it was then, it's for the division. So those that did support it were then, with the Irish Freedom Committee, were connected to Republican Sinn Féin.
Yeah. Those
that were with Irish Northern Aid, they were supporting provisional Sinn Féin. So I wouldn't say necessarily ideological in that sense, but a lot of it was probably also friend and family relationships as well. Like, this family had ties to Republican Sinn Féin, so we're going to support them.
Yeah.
This ties with that. So, and also, just the facts of it. Who was fighting the war at that time was this provisional IRA.
Yeah.
It wasn't those aligned to Republican Sinn Féin, so the support stayed with where the prisoners were. So it was a prisoner support organization, so they just kept supporting the prisoners because that was their main goal.
Logistical, yeah, sounds familiar. But Yes for Unity, right? Yes for Unity, and listen, and obviously I'm an activist in Yes for Unity, and everybody who's active with Yes for Unity grapples with this issue in that, despite the fact that demographics have changed and that demographics are now throwing up an opportunity to buck the trend, an opportunity to possibly end partition, if not in our lifetime, certainly in our children's time. With that, the bitter pill is that maybe, already by virtue just of talking about a referendum, we are arguably voting on our own sovereignty, which is a contradiction in terms, and we accept that it's a contradiction, an ideological contradiction. And you have other unsavoury elements there, like the Brit Secretary of State triggering the border poll. These are all things that we grapple with, but we think we have grappled with it. What's your opinion on it as the founding member of Americans for United Ireland? What's your opinion on that difficulty, that ideological difficulty? Because it's a serious difficulty.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. The idea of having to vote for United Ireland, it had to be a referendum on what was already declared in 1916, and then the mandate for the 1918 general election. Like, it makes me uncomfortable. We already had a mandate for an Irish Republic, and then now having to vote for it.
Yeah.
But just thinking about it in practical terms, for the first time in probably ever, we have a chance to remove the British presence in Ireland with peaceful means, without another drop of blood being spilled.
Yeah.
And I think, as much as that makes us uncomfortable, I think we have to explore this route and exhaust it before any other type of resistance can ever be discussed.
Yeah, it's a good point. About exhausting it, because that was one of the first things that we said when we launched this, both on paper and during the tours of the public meetings, is that this mightn't work. If it doesn't, two things, Britain mightn't respect it, and if it doesn't, then the Good Friday Agreement is dead, shown to be dead. But also, and we come at as Republican Socialists, we can't say this often enough, coming at it from the angle of Seamus Costello's doctrine of guerrilla politics. We're not tied to this, Yes for Unity aren't tied to this. We don't believe that we owe Britain any courtesy. We don't think Britain has earned any courtesy from us, and should the referendum process not work, Yes for Unity will not be turned around and say, that was it.
I think we're not going around saying we want to vote for Irish sovereignty. Yeah. It's more recognizing that there probably is going to be a vote.
Well, yeah.
And either we can, as Republicans, can stand aside and let the British state handle that vote, or we can get involved and kind of turn the tables on them for our advantage.
It's a very important point, because I would say absolutely everybody involved in Yes for Unity were definitely opposed to the Good Friday Agreement 22 years ago. We were all saying that Britain should not have this, should not be granted this right of veto over Irish reunification and sovereignty. But here, nobody listened. We weren't listened to that well, and the bulk of the Republican voter base went out and said, "This is what we want." So this is what we've got. And as you say, we have a choice. We can abstain indefinitely and stand in the corner and be utterly irrelevant, or we can try to ensure at least that what happens has a Republican veneer, because we can already see Varadkar, and we can already see the remnants of the old RUC special branch, Harris and other RUC people who are positioning themselves for a United Ireland within the Garda Síochána and at government levels, and their type of United Ireland, to me anyway, is it's just a nightmare scenario. It's only if the likes of ourselves get involved in the referendum process we can try to inject at least some of the old revolutionary position into the equation. But how are you going to sell this argument in America? Like, you're saying that you're advocating the Yes for Unity position, which might bring you up against some of the more orthodox elements over there.
I can think of a couple organizations who I know won't support the idea of Americans for Ireland, but I think that's why it's important for us. Like, we see ourselves in this tradition that I outlined. We're that 21st century example of Irish American support for Irish freedom. So we are for people who have been involved before, who are people who also have never been involved. So if you support any organization of the many political groups, unfortunately, there are in Ireland today, you can be a member of us, or if you support none of them. So we're completely independent of any Irish political party, and I think that frees us to have a broader range of support throughout the American populace and the Irish American community in particular.
Where are you hoping to organise, Colm? Where in the States are you hoping to organise?
As of right now, we're hoping, this whole COVID-19 crisis kind of really put attention to our plans. We're hoping to have a few demonstrations this summer in support of Irish Unity referendum in a number of different cities. We're hoping to organize in a traditional, at least to start off in traditional Irish American communities, so Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, New York, San Francisco will probably be the places where we want to get started. So if any listeners are out there in those communities, feel free to get in touch with us. We have a new website that we launched, which is united-ireland.org.
Yeah.
You can find our mission statement on there and how to get in touch with us.
Brilliant. Colm, I'll let you get on. I want to thank you for your fantastic insight into Irish American activism, and I want to wish you all the very best with your new project. Alright, buddy, and you stay safe across the pond, and send our wishes to all our brethren over there.
I will do.
Good man. Carmela Magat.
Excellent.
There will be another day.